In the center of the planet, there sleeps the great Earth Dragon, a being of incomprehensible might. So immense is his power that even his dreams change the world, granting special individuals on the surface extraordinary powers beyond those of mortal men. This is the Earth of the Mirage universe, and you're listening to the Mirage Barrage. To bend reality, one must first know reality. Perhaps genius, creativity, and madness are so intertwined is that to envision a change in reality to bend the rules, one must first not obey them too much. To see a change in reality that you can set forth, maybe you don't need to be so attached to reality. But, to be effective, one must always have one foot in the real world. The same is true for magic. In the Mirage universe, or at least on the Mirage universe's Earth, magic is created by drawing energy from the spiritual plane of existence and applying its mystic properties to the real world. Like most supernatural occurrences in the Mirage universe, magic was a product of the great Earth Dragon. Both superpowers and magic came from the dreams of the great Earth Dragon, but magic worked slightly differently. A magically imbued individual harnessed unrealized potential from the dragon and directed it intentionally. A super had potential imbued in them directly by the dragon. Being imbued directly meant that supers didn't necessarily have any connection to the spiritual plane of existence. The Great Earth Dragon also created the Spirit Realm, a realm of dreams and possibilities to which the dead went and from which magic came. Psychurge was the greatest of the magicians on Earth. He had nearly unlimited access to this realm of possibilities. To him, little seemed impossible, except, perhaps, understanding those around him. People are complicated to understand. Understanding comes from knowing reality, being bound to it. This was not something Psychurge did well. Psychurge wasn't a hero. Not at first, not in the traditional sense. Psychurge lent his talents to big civic projects, creating bridges, large, specialized scientific facilities, unearthing lost treasures, and the like. His ability to bend reality and manipulate large masses in physically impossible ways was very helpful in these regards, and it helped him sort the world, defining what needed to be avoided in his mystical acts, what couldn't be damaged, what conditions needed to be met, so on and so forth. They all kept him grounded. They gave him a vision of the world. One of advancing knowledge and progress. The world is more complicated than that. Working as a hero was more complicated. A straightforward rampaging super is easy to comprehend and not too difficult to deal with when you are a master of reality. A hostage situation, a little more complicated. Political intrigue, even more so. Dealing with rebels who have just grievances against their government while you're trying to work with that government on a scientific expedition, it becomes exceptionally complicated. On the surface, it had all been so simple. The government of Costa Segura had been reformed. The first Deimos government had been under the thumb of the President for life and had seized much of the property of the people. Some complicated affairs later involving the Global Human Liberation Front, who Psychurge thought were the bad guys, and the government had reformed into the second Deimos government, which was better, he was told. So now Psychurge, a research group from the United States, and the new Costa Seguran government were building a facility to conduct research into the Great Earth Dragon and the energies it released, to see if it was affecting the planet and the environment, like the rainforests of Costa Segura. Then came the rebel attacks. It seemed like they weren't gone after all. At first, Psychurge responded by striking against them with little concern when they attacked. But as soon as he had done so for the first time, the research group's personnel urged him never to do so again. It was all so complicated. It seemed the rebels had some valid complaints against the second Deimos government, which wasn't so reformed after all. He should have known, the former President for life was still the president, and yet the rebels were generally reckless and ruthless, hardly paragons of the people. Of course, Psychurge couldn't just go off and fix the government, though he suggested doing that. It just wasn't that simple, though. There were people involved. Besides, the scientists needed to work with the government, and even if they didn't have sympathies towards some of the rebels' causes, they had other reasons not to overreact to them. If the rebels were treated too harshly, it would only give them sympathy, and that would redouble their efforts. Worse, factions within the government who sympathized with them could use their plight to their own advantage. If they did so, well, the new faction would be just as bad, just with different enemies. And Psychurge had already provoked them. And despite the fact that the facility was just being made for research, the rebels now considered it a target. It worked with the government. It was fair play. The researchers were working with the government, and that was good enough reason. From then on, everything Psychurge tried failed. The rebels kept coming and coming, and he couldn't convince them to stop. He could connect with their minds, but it didn't matter. They were convinced. And Psychurge would not cross the lines the researchers set. He wouldn't use his power to crush them. Of course he wouldn't. In a fit of desperation, as the rebels launched a final attack that nearly destroyed the facility, still under construction, Psychurge reached deep into the spirit realm and brought down magic unlike any other. He saved everyone, completed the facility, publicly displayed the crimes of both government officials and rebels alike, and connected the minds of 1 million people for an instant of pure understanding and peace. And if they still tried to fight, they'd find their weapons suddenly useless. But all that power took its toll. Psychurge had reached so far into the spirit world that he never came back. When he awoke, he was trapped within a glass coffin in a crystal tree, deep in the spirit world. But he had done it. The peace lasted about a year. Psychurge was back in the crystal tree again, alone. Cut off from the physical plane, his avatar destroyed, and he might have to dive deeper still. The cult, they had found, wanted to wake the Great Earth Dragon. He was close. It was just possible he could reach out and try to soothe him to sleep. Maybe. But there were other things to try first. He had one connection left. As the Stormbreakers hung from their usual perch, Renaissance Man continuing to try and break free despite no progress, something slipped in through a small tunnel, an air shaft. "What is that?" No Man asked, the first to see it. "Psychurge?" Sekhmet asked, staring in astonishment at the cape. It was Psychurge's, flying on its own. Could it be that it was still connected to their shattered friend? The tip of the cape waggled up and down as if to nod. "Well, this is neat," Diego commented. "Can it do tricks, too?" The cape nodded again. "I was kind of being sarcastic. We need to work with you on that. It doesn't really matter if it can roll over or..." The cape whooshed over to Dynamo, and before he could say anything else, it wrapped around his eyes. "Unfortunately," Diego said in a strange tone, "he won't be able to see just what kind of trick this is." "Psychurge?" No Man asked, startled. "How is this possible?" "My cape is the physical connection I have to this world from the spiritual plane. Normally, I just use it to control my body, but the, signals I send to it can be used to link my mind to another body as well. I'm sure Diego won't mind." "Forget Diego. You should be using this on one of the cultists. Stop this ritual before it begins," Renaissance Man insisted. "That would be a bad idea," Diego/Psychurge corrected. "If the cult had only one plan, then I would not hesitate, but my cape has heard rumors that there is a backup. Unfortunately, I don't know what it is, and no one here seems to, save perhaps the Archbishop." "Then we're out of options again," Renaissance Man said. "Not entirely. This cape currently connects myself and Diego, but if I were to split it in two, it could connect one of you to one of the cultists." "And how does that help?" "It will help because while you could sabotage the ritual, I could focus on keeping the Great Earth Dragon asleep. Magic is the manipulation of his dreaming. I am already closer to him, trapped here. I may have some say in this matter, and maybe can stop whatever the backup plan is." "Wait, Psychurge," Scion interjected. "What happens to you if the cape is torn?" "Nothing happens to me," Psychurge replied. "I stay as I am, trapped in the spirit plane." "No, that's not what I meant." Psychurge hesitated. "I will lose my connection to the physical plane." That's not an option. We can't lose a valuable member of the team like that. I will not be lost forever, Sykerge said calmly. I will be fine. I will just be absent. One day, I'm sure you will all find me again. We are the Stormbreakers. We can do it if we try. Then try to stay with us. Not today. Today, we try to save the world. Scion bit her lip. Then she nodded. You're our safety net, then. We'll be counting on you more than you know. Perhaps so, Sykerge answered again, and the green cloth unraveled from Diego's face. What just happened? Did anyone else see dancing pink elephants? Diego said, shaking his head. So, who gets the honor of wearing this thing? Renaissance Man asked, ignoring Diego. I think the answer is obvious. You, Scion replied. You can keep most of your strengths no matter who the cape possesses. Hey, can someone fill me in? Diego asked. Not now, No Man replied. I'm ready, Renaissance Man said to the cape. Slowly, it ripped itself in half down the middle, and one sped off down a passage out of the room. The other half hovered before Renaissance Man. The thin green strip of cloth wrapped around Renaissance Man's lower face, just like his scarf always did. The shade of green was slightly different than the usual face covering, but so long as no one spared more than a passing glance, no one would notice. Renaissance Man's head slumped ever so slightly. His body still remained mostly tensed, and Sekhmet wondered if that was an effect of the cape, or of some of the training Renaissance Man had undergone to appear mostly awake even when he was asleep. Either way, the second after his head drooped, the procession came in. Archbishop Uriah Mass in his red robes led the way in, several figures in white robes behind him, all carrying various items that must have had some importance, and the Marquis bringing up the rear. But there was one other that they didn't notice at first. They didn't notice her because she was a practically invisible mist drifting in alongside the other's feet. Sekhmet only noticed at first when she realized how odd it was for mist to be present here, and just as she was making that connection, the formless cloud started to bunch together and define itself. The mist slowly condensed into the form of a translucent woman. They didn't acknowledge the Stormbreakers, but instead listened as Archbishop Mass directed them intently. They placed their objects in a specific pattern, mostly around the lava ring, and Mass constantly checked in with them. The Marquis didn't seem to pay much attention, and instead examined some dirt under his fingernail. He said something Sekhmet couldn't quite hear, but Uriah's reply she could. No, certainly not. This is a precise and gentle operation. Besides, we have everything we need. I thought we were missing some pieces, the Marquis pouted. No, the guests have just arrived today. I mean, if you're sure it will work. The basics are simple enough. Both the tablet and Edward will connect us to the Great Dragon. Our Lady of Spirit will ensure that we are connected as we beseech it, amplifying our voices. And if that's not enough, the presence of another great elder being should rouse it from slumber. Another great elder being? What could Mass mean? There weren't any other old gods within the solar system. Unless... Here are our guests now, Mass announced. Now cooperate with them, he insisted to the Marquis. Sekhmet wasn't paying much attention to them anymore. She had set her jaw, eyes intent on one of the two new guests. The other half of Sykerge's cape wrapped itself around the eyes of a cultist wandering alone. After a moment in which the cultist grabbed at the fabric and tried to struggle, the body relaxed. Renaissance Man flexed the fingers of the new body, then stretched the other muscles. It was a weird, wrong feeling, like wearing someone else's skin, but he had no time to dwell on it. Quickly following the path mapped out in his mind, he arrived at the door that was about to be assaulted, opened it, and looking out into the bright sky declared, "Howdy there, neighbor." By the time his new eyes could make out the figures, they were preparing for a fight, but the sight of this cultist with a green cloth wrapped around his eyes startled them. While, through quite literally magic, Renaissance Man could see them, they couldn't understand that. "Jeremy, Orson, stop hanging there and get inside. It's me, Reynold." They hesitated, but eventually floated down. "Reynold?" Kid Cosmos asked tentatively. Yeah, long story. Short version, Sykerge is magic. Sykerge is alright. He's here? Crusader asked intently. Yes and no, in that order, Renaissance Man answered. We don't have time for details. Just count him out for this one. The ritual is about to begin, and if we don't stop it, we're in trouble. You should know, Kid put in. We have the Commissars in tow. The Commissars? Renaissance Man asked, taken aback for once. Consider them some added muscle, Crusader replied. But we should get to the others before they do, just in case. Agreed, said Renaissance Man. But we have to steal a key component for the ritual. A tablet. That will shut it down fast. The Commissars are already headed towards the main chamber, Kid said worriedly. Can you stall them? Only if I have a really good reason. Saving the world should count. I'll get on it. Just tell me the play. I have to pay someone a visit. Someone who will tell me just where I can find this tablet. Renaissance Man grabbed Victor. They were in a small room, Crusader and the others having tracked down Victor rather quickly as he was getting ready for the ceremony. Unhand me, you traitor! Victor tried to howl at what appeared to be the cultist shoving him against the wall. For the record, he's not a traitor, Crystal Crusader corrected. That's actually Renaissance Man in there. What? How? Your dragon, Renaissance Man said unhelpfully. Now, the tablet. Tell us where it is. No, I won't let you ruin the ceremony. Renaissance Man isn't playing around, and neither are we, Crusader said menacingly, referring to himself and his crystal spirit. We don't have time to play nice. I don't care, Victor said, putting on something of a stoic expression. I will do what I must. The great dragon will be woken. It's that important to you? Renaissance Man demanded. It is everything. It is my answer. You want an answer. You want a reason for your gift. There are no gifts. Easy for you to say, Victor spat. No, it isn't. I watched the love of my life wither and die before my eyes. My 2 sons first loved me when they were children. When they grew up, they worshipped me, forcing their children to try to love me as they had. My grandchildren resented me for being a forced object of affection and grew to hate their fathers, my sons. My sons then resented me for not being the amazing figure they always imagined me to be, and blamed me for turning their sons against them. My grandchildren still vacillated between loving me and hating me, partly hoping that if they learned to love me, everything would turn out to be better again, but they never could. Some tried to hide their children, my great-grandchildren, from me, while others continued the tradition of presenting them to me like they were gifts. Each of my great-grandchildren barely knew me, and so they treated me like a legend, and never wanted to know more. Even those sheltered from me began to obsess over my legacy, and that's when the cult was born. My only offspring will forever worship or hate me, because they will all eventually become older than me, and all will go from looking up to looking down on me. None will ever know me as I am. They're too close. I don't want to hear. Shut up, I'm not done. Sekhmet Sion is born of uncounted generations of psychopathic mothers and had to watch her own mother get consumed by the vicious spirit responsible for millennia of cruelty. And that is the source of her powers. Every time no man uses his gift, he empowers a lunatic. That very same lunatic couldn't fathom the nature of his powers and hung all his hopes on no man providing an answer he never could. Sykerge became so detached from reality, so great was his gift, that he now is trapped by his own doing, possibly forever, in a world of smoke and mirrors. So convincing, Victor tried to mock. What about Dynamo? He hardly seems as dour as the rest of you. Renaissance Man leaned in closer. That's because you don't know him, and because you're not thinking. Don't insult me. How fast does Dynamo run? I don't know. He can react at speed. What? Dynamo can think at speeds neither you or I could comprehend. He can process information thousands of times over by the time you or I could just begin to take it in. If he starts thinking, he doesn't stop. He will focus on every wrong thing in this world, every aspect, every crime, every villain, and obsess until he despairs. He can only cope by doing one thing. Victor waited. Not thinking, Renaissance Man said simply. There is no gift, Victor. There is only circumstance. You drew the short straw. Too bad. You were never promised anything more. And if you're going to be so resentful over something that never was going to happen, then we know where we stand. Tears started to stream down Victor's cheeks. I don't believe you. I don't believe you. There has to be an answer. The dragon will tell me. The dragon can't help you. It can only do worse. I'll take that chance, Victor spat hysterically, whether he believed it or not. Now Crystal Crusader leaned in. You will, huh? Well, let me tell you a story. The ceremony began with Archbishop Mass raising a hand to Edward. The ring of lava that always surrounded him started to cool. A full third of the circle, the third facing the Archbishop, cooled to stone once more. The two columns of white-robed cultists behind Archbishop Mass then began to chant. Just as Diego was about to open his mouth and make some remark to destroy the somber atmosphere of the ceremony, Renaissance Man, now without the cape, Sekhmet Scion, and No Man all glared at him to keep quiet for now. The mist-like ghostly lady began to float above the congregation. More higher-ranking cultists started to walk in, surrounding the ring of lava in the rear of the chamber, which was now heavily shadowed as the cult dimmed the lights. At the back of the procession, just before the Stormbreakers, the robot who had tried to kill the president, Prime Arsenal, emerged. You're still on their payroll? Diego whispered incredulously. Prime Arsenal mockingly lifted a finger in front of where his mouth normally would be, shushing him. But despite this, he answered quietly.
They're paying quite well, in alien tech.
Valuable even if the planet is destroyed, Renaissance Man noted.
Pretty much,
the robot agreed, sounding as if he were grinning ear to ear.
I have backed myself up in a few secure places as well, for insurance, of course.
Meanwhile, joining the ranks of the senior cultists, the Marquis stepped in, somber for once in his life, devoid of his manic smile. His eyes, however, were still wide and crazed as ever. Two other figures also joined the ranks in the back, though they were shrouded in shadow. Finally, two green-robed men brought in a platform held between the two of them. On it rested something, covered by a carefully woven covering. It was brought to the center of the assembly and placed before Edward and the Archbishop. The ghostly lady hovered above the crowd, her misty form slowly connecting each mind together. A series of red, glowing dots suddenly formed above everyone else, hovering directly over Edward and the covered tablet. Then the Archbishop reached over carefully and removed the covering. A plain stone, crudely cut like the tablet, was in its place. On it, roughly, had been drawn a face with its tongue sticking out. The Archbishop stared, unblinking. The Stormbreakers turned to Renaissance Man. My bad, he said. Ha! Nice! Diego exclaimed. And then the four Stormbreakers ripped themselves from the wall. Before the Archbishop could stammer a question as to how this was possible, Crystal Crusader's spirit leapt from Dynamo's now open restraints and sped across the room. Up and to the right, Crystal Crusader looked over them all, and with a loud thud, Kid Cosmos broke through the wall on the opposite side. Let's keep calm and make this nice and easy, shall we? Sekhmet Scion said. The Archbishop already had the Iron Fist on, but he couldn't pick a target. The four Stormbreakers had already spread out, while Kid and Crusader were nowhere near their companions. As powerful as the fist was, it couldn't capture them all, spread out as they were. Give up now, and no one needs to get hurt, Scion ordered. And this is why we have a plan B, the Marquis said excitedly. You'll do nothing, Archbishop Mass declared. The Marquis rolled his eyes but didn't make a move. Mass turned to the Stormbreakers. Tell me where the tablet is. I'd listen to him, one of the guests said. Director Adam, formerly Levon Adams of the Crystal Crusaders, stepped fully into view. His black coat was the same style as the Crystal Crusaders' uniform, but it was lined with red where there had formerly been the crystal blue or sharp yellow. "Adams," Orson said through gritted teeth. "I can't believe it. Of everyone in the world, why would you want to wake one of the old gods? Don't tell me you've come to worship it too." "No, I don't," he said gravely. "I don't want to be here, Orson. My distinguished colleagues here will have to excuse me, but I think it's a flip of the coin whether this dragon will be benevolent." "That's blasphemy, of course," Uriah mused gently. His tone was without venom. The two were allies, and they knew it full well. They wouldn't easily be split apart. "Then why are you doing this?" Orson demanded. "Are you that crazy?" "Orson, I have never been crazy, and your insistence that I am is a rather sad coping mechanism. As always, I have never been more sane. As for what convinced me," Director Adam grimaced and gestured to the side. "He did." It was Dauntless Dynamo's turn to gasp in shock. Stepping out from the shadows was the second guest. A man in full black, high-tech armor, slim and form-fitting, save for a few gadgets, monitors, and breathing apparatus, and the round black helmet, opaque visor hiding the face. The last time Dynamo had seen this man, he had been on an intercontinental sprint, delivering urgently needed supplies when this black figure appeared next to him. Not only had he kept pace with Dynamo, but he had communicated telepathically. For years, Diego had tried to track him down, but never could. "What did he say to you?" Orson finally asked Adams, but Dynamo was the one that answered. "You warned him of a disaster in 2 years, didn't you?" Dynamo demanded of the black figure.
"It is true. The disaster will occur in 2 years, and of the few things that can stop it, the great Earth Dragon is one."
"How do you know this?" Diego pressed on. "Who are you?"
"I can't tell you that,"
the black figure replied. "But you think risking all of humanity if the dragon isn't so kind is worth it to prevent this disaster? A disaster that might not even happen?" Diego insisted.
"It will happen,"
the black figure confirmed.
"Only the dragon can stop it now."
"But you won't share with us," Diego noted. "How is that going to help anyone?"
"It will prevent things from getting worse,"
the figure replied. "And yet, because of that, we'll have no choice but to fight you."
"You will do what you must, and I am sorry for this. But we do have the numbers advantage, and I can't allow you to stop me."
"You may have to count again," Sekhmet Scion interjected. "We didn't come without backup." "Strange," the Archbishop announced confidently, "because I don't see them." "You will," Scion replied. "But this is your last chance. Come quietly, or things will get messy." "The will of the dragon will not be subverted by misguided saints." "While I appreciate the flattery, we're no saints. Right now, we're more like the anvil." The Stormbreakers shifted in unison just as the Archbishop began to raise the iron fist. Then, the ceiling burst apart, tiny bits of rock pelting the congregation as everyone started the attack. The robed cultists shot out their energy ropes, though they were blinded to the location of the heroes. The black figure shot forward, his incredible speed dispersing the clouds of dust and debris. Archbishop Mass raised his gauntleted hand towards Scion as soon as he saw her, and started to close his hand. Then it was knocked into the dirt, dragging the Archbishop to his knees. The one responsible stood before him in a long black coat. "We," Comrade Cosmos announced, "are the Hammer." The other 6 premier commissars soared in through the roof and joined the fray. Energy flew from the cultists, while powers from over a dozen uniquely powered individuals clashed. In the midst of the chaos of the battlefield, the black figure shot off, deeper into the facility, no doubt looking for the stolen tablet. As soon as Diego saw him go, he rushed off after him. The two zipped through the maze-like hallways of the volcano temple.
"Don't you understand what you've done?"
the figure demanded of Diego, communicating directly by thought. "You won't tell me!" Diego shouted back.
"I wish I could."
"You can try."
"All I can say is that your planet isn't safe. You have to leave while you still can."
"Unless you can do better than that, I'm not going anywhere. Besides, it's not like me to run from a fight."
"Good thing,"
the black figure said as they rushed through several rooms. Flashing in and out of a closet, Diego saw to his shock that he now held the tablet with the Ankh on it.
You might not have to.
Diego redoubled his effort to catch up to the black figure. Despite the fact that his feet never actually touched the floor, the figure was just as fast as Diego. He hovered a couple of inches off it and was propelled through the air by means unknown. His arms and legs barely moved as he casually approached the sound barrier. Diego couldn't let him get back to the throne room with that. He would cut him off. Diego started bleeding off power, dumping everything into his speed. And then he tumbled before soaring and crashing across the battlefield of the main chamber. 2 cultists had interweaved their energies at the very last minute. Diego was focused on catching the black figure and momentarily forgot his other unique power. The black figure was a psychic of some sort and had communicated to the 2 cultists the exact moment to ambush Diego. He was out of the fight for maybe 1 second. That was all that it took. The black figure had zipped through the chaos and handed the tablet to Edward. "No!" Diego called out. As soon as he did, the black figure was back in front of him.
If only you knew. You would thank me,
he said.
But I can live without the thanks.
"You'll be waiting a long time," Diego replied and tried to rush around him. The black figure slid at Mach speed in front of him, blocking his way. Diego tried to go left, but he was blocked there too. "Fine," he declared. "I like a challenge." And then he zipped around, hoping to find a way past the psychic speedster. As they passed by Scion, who had just tumbled and leapt her way through half a dozen cultists, he relayed that Edward had the tablet. Scion looked towards the ring of lava in horror, ignoring the 6 figures behind her even as they tried to charge her. They all collapsed just before reaching her, their muscles suddenly not responding, as Scion decided to set off for herself. And then, the Spirit Lady, who had been hovering over all of this, swooped down towards Edward. No, not towards Edward. Towards the tablet. She flew in an arc into and out of it, and came to a halt right before Scion, just as the latter reached the now cool rock that had once been part of the fiery circle. Sekhmet gaped in astonishment. The Spirit Lady began to take shape. Sion's astonishment then turned to horror as she realized the Spirit Lady wasn't becoming just any form. She was becoming one all too familiar. "Hello, daughter," Khepri smiled viciously. "Oh, how I've missed you." "I've missed you too," Scion managed to say, "but I've missed the real you." "Oh, I'm quite real," Khepri assured her as her form finished materializing, the last vestiges of mist vanishing. "My spirit never dies, and while this is a surprise to be back among the land of the living, it is a pleasant one nonetheless. Rarely does one get the opportunity to come back to attend to unfinished business." "The last thing I asked of you was to be near me," she said quietly. "Again, I assure you, I am quite real." "I know," Scion replied. "I know that you're really her spirit. That's not what I meant." Anger flashing across her face, Khepri dove forward, just as Rashida expertly dodged and weaved back through the crowd. Her mother wasn't trained. The only problem was that Scion could never touch her. Sykerge focused his mind. Even here in the spirit plane, trying to contact the great Earth Dragon was nigh impossible. Though here, it was for slightly different reasons than on Earth. Sykerge's mind delved below the surface of the plane, down deeper and deeper into the pure spiritual realm. Clouds of thought and feeling rushed past his awareness. The world he was tunneling through was beyond most words and ideas. It was so ephemeral that one could lose themselves within it. But Sykerge knew how to handle himself here. Flowing through the currents of consciousness, he was right on course, even as they tried to pull him off into the abyss. Through the eddies and tornadoes of the fine matter that consciousness emerges from, Sykerge pushed on. And as they faded away, the force started. The ever-rising force of the presence of the great Earth Dragon met him. The deeper Sykerge's astral image went, the mightier the force became. His image was battered from side to side, but never lost cohesion entirely. He was getting close. Then, as he approached through the complete formlessness, a single hair-thin beam of light descended past him. Like water through a leaky roof, the stream of thought fell past him, into the presence below. It was the cult. their ritual, their prayer. Sykerge pushed down further until the pressure of the dragon's presence made it nearly impossible to descend beyond. Then slowly, a crescent shape of light appeared. It grew, very slowly. It was thin, ever so thin. It was an eye. The barely opened eye projected orange light upwards and struck Sykerge's image. The force was not even a breath to the dragon, but it nearly destroyed Sykerge's astral form. He held together, though. All he could do was concentrate. Even as the force tore at his reality, concentrate. Focus on concrete calm. He would not be deterred. Everything was calm and fine. A determined calm. The dragon saw him, and he saw the dragon. They were connected. Slowly, the eye began to close, even as the stream continued to pour onto it. Above the chaos in what used to be the sanctuary, Director Adam floated, surrounded by a glowing red energy. Crystal Crusader rushed at him, intending to strike him with his shield. Since both were using their spirits to fly in the air, he would use blunt force to take down Adam. Suddenly, two new, equally red spirits burst from Adam and struck at Orson from behind. "How?" he asked. Adams lifted his hands and revealed two crystal rings. "Where did you get those?" Fiennes asked, but he feared he knew the answer. "Not everyone is cut out for the Crusaders," Director Adams said grimly, confirming Orson's fears. "But the crystal spirits are often open to new ideas." The two spirits dove for another attack. Orson held up the shield, and his own spirit created a latticework energy shield, which expanded outward from that position. The red spirits were held at bay for a moment, but Orson was outgunned. Ironclaw burst from the crowd, upward, and punched Adam across the jaw, sending him spinning. She followed up with two bursts of her concussive beams. One hit, while Adam spun out of the way of the other. The spirit still fused with his uniform, doing most of the work, but he quickly regained focus and targeted Ironclaw. Powerful as the bloodied crystal spirit could make him, he was no match for an Ashfelian, even an artificial one. Unfortunately, Ironclaw was just that, an artificial Ashfelian. One free spirit merged with the rock from the floor and started building walls to block the concussive beams from hitting Adam. While they were shattered quickly, new ones took their place just as the old ones were destroyed. The second spirit went on the offensive. It shot out towards the flying Ironclaw and merged with her advanced suit. Her strength became her greatest vulnerability when faced with the former Crystal Crusader. At once, her right gauntlet exploded. The spirit began ripping through her armor, destroying systems as it went. Ironclaw tried to use the suit's immediate defense system. It energized and electrified the suit, but that only slightly disoriented the crystal spirit. A boulder flew at Director Adam. The spirit creating defensive walls quickly shifted and pushed the rock aside, but another immediately followed, then another. Orson Fiennes continued to direct his spirit to fire a string of rocks from slowly changing angles. Director Adam was kept off balance at the constant influx. The second Crimson Spirit, which had been destroying Ironclaw's suit, returned to help defend its master. Ironclaw immediately took the opportunity, and with her only good gauntlet, fired a concussive beam that struck Director Adam in the side. Adam decided that was enough. He ducked and weaved through the concussive beams and rocks, and instructed his two free spirits to catch them and use them as shields. Then, he started throwing them back. Ironclaw was hit, and with the damaged suit was sent spinning and fell from the air. Orson's spirit returned to the shield and expanded it once more as the rock slammed into it and forced him backwards. "I don't like this," Orson muttered. "This is just flat cheating," the spirit agreed, straining against a new onslaught of boulders Adam's spirits were grabbing from the wall behind him. Then the shield cracked. The broken man flying by couldn't do much to help. Director Adams' shield would be difficult to take out while two free spirits orbited him. But the Marquis... he was just a man. No defenses. The broken man's shards could slice him to pieces. Just as the Marquis fired an arrow, the shards dove for the attack. The arrow slammed into Sekhmet's armor. No damage, but it pushed her back on a predictable course. Khepri burst forward with sudden, surprising speed. Without Scion dodging, it would be easy to grab her. While Sekhmet's bare arms were useful in fighting other opponents as it allowed her to use her mystic touch, it was a weakness now. Fortunately, Sekhmet was more than her powers. As Khepri came into arm's reach, Scion allowed the arrow to carry her through the air, lifting her legs and kicking into the distorted version of her mother. Her boots safely kicked her away, and then she could focus on dislodging herself from the arrow. No need to worry, momentum was no longer being pumped into it. The Marquis had seen the shards approach and changed his focus. While he could have kept pushing the arrow, he decided against that. Instead, he focused his power on the shards. Unexpectedly, the Marquis twisted and struck the shards as they approached, deflecting them just slightly off their course but imbuing them with enough momentum to bury themselves into the ground and walls. The Broken Man turned away a few of his shards at the last second and flew off, trying to extract those now buried deep in the rock as the Marquis laughed and acquired a new target. Comrade Cosmos burst through a crowd of robed cultists, only to be cut short mid-flight, stuck in mid-air. Archbishop Uriah Mass flicked the fingers of the Iron Fist and tossed the mighty Commissar aside. A coordinated charge by the Eye, the Plasmic Giant, Kid Cosmos, No Man, and the Rocket Man flew towards Edward. Immediately, the man inside warped the lava ring surrounding him into a protective shield, a sphere around him. As they strode forward, Mass gripped No Man. No Man engulfed himself in his own field and stretched it to the floor. When Mass tried to fling him across the room, he didn't move, and simply absorbed the potential momentum. So Uriah Mass closed his fist and began to crush him. The Rocket Man fired at the Archbishop. With only one hand having the incredible power, Archbishop Mass had to release No Man to catch the rockets in his own field. He then turned them around and slammed them into the Rocket Man, who vanished in a series of explosions. Mass turned back towards No Man, but then his gauntlet froze in midair. No Man stayed out of reach of the Iron Fist's power, twisted, and kicked Mass in the back of the head. Mass was dazed, but his followers immediately swarmed onto No Man. No Man had to release the dazed Archbishop and began to fight off the swarm. The Eye tried to shoot through Edward's ball of lava, but a wall of rock burst in front of him and blocked the beam. The Plasma Man shifted and simply oozed through the lava, but the rocks shifted again and pushed him out. Kid Cosmos ripped out a large chunk of rock, using it to block the flow of lava, and pushed his way through the defensive walls. But the flow of lava just shifted and started flooding over Kid until he had to rush back. Then Edward shot out a series of rocks which collided with the Eye, splattered the Plasmic Man, and even struck down Kid Cosmos. And then a particularly large rock flew through a gap in the crowd. As Sekhmet Scion dodged the strikes from Khepri while dodging the cultists, the boulder hit her unaware. It shoved her into the wall, embedding her there. Scion saw movement approaching her. She looked up. Khepri raised her arm to strike, an obviously telegraphed blow, but stuck in the rock, Scion couldn't dodge. And then, a black-gloved hand tapped on Khepri's shoulder. Confused, she actually turned and looked back to see the Mirrored Man. All of the twistedness of the spirit of Sekhmet, the twisted soul that had haunted the family for generations, warping the world around itself, was turned back inward. Khepri staggered for a moment. Then Scion realized something. The Mirrored Man wasn't looking at Khepri. He was using his power on her, but he was looking at Scion, at Rashida. Half of his face had been replaced with some sort of hard plastic and metal. Possibly it was cybernetics holding him together after the beating he had received by Kid Cosmos. But the other half of his face was still that silvery mirror, and in it she could see the rest of the Stormbreakers and Commissars. This is why he was here. Not for Khepri, but for her. And then Khepri swung wildly with her arm, connecting with the Mirrored Man, shattering his arm and sending him flying, spinning like a top. With that time and a burst of energy, Scion tore herself from the rock and dashed right past Khepri. She realized what she needed to do. Shortly after, both the Stormbreakers and Commissars heard Sekhmet's instructions over their comm. Then, the Eye spoke.
"Thank you for getting knocked around. Would you like to return the favor?"
"It's about time," Renaissance Man agreed. When Dynamo heard the news, he grimaced. "You know," he called to the psychic speedster, who was chasing him around the battlefield, never letting him close to Edward or the tablet. "This really is your last chance."
"Last chance?"
the speedster asked. "To tell me what you know."
"Sorry, but telling you that will change events. I can only insist that you heed my warning, and to stop interfering in our last hope.
Well, I can do one of those, Dynamo said, disappointed and disgusted. As for the other, he made to strike at the black figure. As he had done before, the psychic simply read his mind and dodged out of the way. He knew exactly where he would strike, even if he couldn't read that deeply into Dynamo's mind. Dynamo sped past after the dodge, not slowing down. The speedster followed. An ambush, he realized. He could sense the thought. He sensed it a split second before it happened, but strangely, he couldn't sense where the blow would come from. He could sense another being, but even it didn't know. How? It was the Broken Man. He reformed for an instant before Dynamo, who spun around and struck the Commissar with a burst of force. The Broken Man shattered as he was supposed to, and the black figure realized why he didn't know where the strike was coming from exactly. The pieces shot out in several directions, like a burst from a shotgun. The black figure was fast and began to dodge, but the pieces changed course, because they were alive. With the force of Dynamo's strike and the course adjustments of the Broken Man himself, some of the shards cut through the psychic speedster's armor. Gas started to hiss out, and while the man was mostly okay, he could feel some of the injuries, and his suit was damaged. Diego called to him. Give up. It's just a matter of time now. The black figure looked up to Dynamo.
You don't know how true that is,
it replied. Then, in a burst of speed, it ran out of the room. Diego immediately followed. I won't let you get away, he called.
I'm sure your friends will appreciate that,
the figure replied pointedly.
You won't find your answers today.
They streaked out onto the island and then onto the water. Dynamo was no longer in contact with the Earth. He was running on reserve energy. He glared at the black figure, but he knew he had been right. He would have to wait for answers for another day. Gritting his teeth, Diego turned back towards the island. The Marquis kept firing shots alternately at Cosmos and Scion. Both leaders were incredibly strong, but they just couldn't compete with the attacks that broke the laws of physics. No Man and Renaissance Man leapt in before him, both knocking together the heads of some of the cultists as they did so. No Man and Renaissance Man leapt in before him, knocking together 2 heads of cultists as they did so. The Marquis smiled, tossed away the bow, but grabbed 6 arrows from the quiver with his right hand. He blocked a few jabs from Renaissance Man with his left, while tossing the arrows with his right. They weren't fast, but he was cheating. He wasn't aiming for No Man, but targets of opportunity from among the other Stormbreakers and Commissars. No Man had to quickly snatch the arrows from the air and hold them for just a moment so that their intended targets could get clear. Then his hand could be free to snatch the next batch. Meanwhile, while the Renaissance Man had been unparalleled in most martial arts known to man, the Marquis had developed his own style. He deflected a blow and imbued it with momentum. Renaissance Man was forced to overreach and would soon be dragged out of the fight as his fist kept flying in that direction. He soon would... The Marquis tripped over and slammed into the ground. He quickly tried to scramble to his feet, but he felt something tug his leg up and around, and he fell again. Clever little sneak, the Marquis thought with realization and horror. Renaissance Man had placed his feet carefully, with one between the Marquis's. He had anticipated the momentum attack, and as he was carried away, his legs naturally swept the Marquis as well. Then, when the momentum abruptly stopped, Renaissance Man had renewed his attack, tripping him again. The Marquis scrambled away and picked himself up. He drew back his fist to strike at Renaissance Man, and suddenly felt his arm come to a complete stop. Oops, he chuckled nervously. I forgot. Renaissance Man punched him in the stomach, and as he was doubled over, No Man knocked him out with an uppercut to the chin. As the battle continued, Orson's spirit flew off in a streak of blue. Director Adam tried to track it, but it was too fast. Where did you send it? He demanded. The other red spirit who had been tasked with fighting Orsons instead joined the attack on the Crusader. Soon, with 3 spirits against him and a diminishing amount of energy left by the spirit to form his shield, he was quickly defeated. Soon he flopped over under the onslaught of the 3 bloody spirits. 2 of Director Adam's spirits raised Orson's limp arms, lifting them to either side of him and dragging him before their master. I don't want to do this, Orson, Adam said sadly. I wish you would just understand. You are insane, Fiennes gasped. I'm not, Director Adams said in a burst of frustration. Everything I do is based on a logical series of considerations. You just don't understand the universe as I do. Let me help you. You are insane, Fiennes repeated. Let me try to explain. You are insane. I am not, Adam exploded. He kicked Orson in the stomach, twisting the point of his boot ever so slightly as it dug in. Suddenly he realized what he was doing, but he didn't let the surprise show. He quickly straightened himself. Strangely, when Orson lifted his head to finally look him in the eye, he was smiling. I'm not the one you have to convince, Orson replied. Then his eyes drifted to the side, to something behind Adam. Director Adam turned and came face to face with what remained of the mirrored man standing behind him. After a moment of surprise taking in the strange-looking man, he still didn't understand and began to turn back to Orson. Whatever game his former friend was playing, no. A game is a form of play with a set of rules, often with a clear goal to determine a winner, possibly with points. Orson would be using a strategy. No, a strategy is a large-scale scheme. This was a small-scale operation decided in battle. This was a tactic. Wait, was the mirrored man the tactic? Or was the tactic the words he chose, while the mirrored man was the strategy? Was he mirrored, or was he silver? Was a polished enough silver a mirror? Were they both the same? This is his strategy. No, this is a tactic. It doesn't matter. I can see what he's doing. You aren't seeing what he's doing. You aren't receiving visual information. It doesn't matter. This is how he'll defeat me. Understanding implies truth, and how can you know this is true? How could he know the true state of your mind? If he guessed, then you can't understand it because there was no concrete truth to begin with. And who can know a mind anyway? And what is knowing? Isn't it all just guesses? How can you guess without knowing some sort of truth? Orson Fiennes watched Adams clutch at his head. Slowly, his carefully defined sanity was falling apart. The spirits that had just a moment ago been holding Crusader leapt from his uniform back to their master, but there was nothing they could do. Adams's tenuous grasp at sanity was being peeled away. Orson felt his stomach knot at the cruel trick he had played on his old friend. But he couldn't let him get away. His own spirit returned, thankfully, because he needed the strength to stand. It had done its job in summoning the mirrored man, but now he needed it more than ever. Orson used the last bits of his own strength to rush forward and dove to tackle Director Adam. Two of the red spirits lanced out and sliced at him, knocking him aside. Orson wouldn't let that be the end. He stood up again. The spirits were raising Adam once more, making him fly even as he clutched his head and screamed. Don't worry, Director Adam, the original spirit could be heard saying. We'll make you better. A rocket streaked towards Orson Fiennes. Before he could react, Kid Cosmos leapt in front of its path and took the impact. Prime Arsenal switched to the defensive as Kid Cosmos charged at him again. Poor Ashfelion. He was good and had a wide array of tools at his disposal, but Kid's arsenal was no match compared to himself. It was in his name, after all. He switched to the attack. Lasers, rockets, razor discs, and shards of metal fired towards Kid. Prime Arsenal carefully coordinated the fire. This was what he was made for. The lasers scanned up and down Kid, reducing the electrostatic field. The rockets would keep him from flying too far from one side to the other, while everything else would chip away while he lined up the final shot. One xenosite bullet. That's all it would take. And then all of his sensors redlined. He had just collided with a glowing green blob of ooze that came out of nowhere. What had happened? The Plasmic Man. His plasma or acid or whatever it was now eating away at his form, his outer shell, now his interior as well. He desperately tried to damage control. He reestablished just long enough to see Kid Cosmos standing before him. He quickly fired the xenosite bullet, but Kid reacted the moment he saw the hidden hatch open on the robot. His hand shot forward, and the bullet pierced his skin, but was caught. Kid winced in pain for a moment, then raised his other free hand. Drat! A single concussive beam blew the weakened robot to pieces. You turned your back on me! I have never done so. I swear until my dying breath, now that I know your spirit is as warped as you in real life, I will not stop until it is restored, until you are freed. Kepri continued her mad chase after her daughter. Silly girl, this is my spirit now. There is nothing you can do. Then I will have to take satisfaction in defeating you and destroying this false legacy. You truly are an insult to your heritage. And yet, that's the kindest thing you've said to me. I couldn't be more proud. And then out of nowhere, the Commissar with the rocket engine struck at Khepri. She was thrown off balance as it ran into her. She threw him aside, but he launched a cloud of missiles, which exploded all around her. As she coughed from the smoke, it reappeared. She reacted, striking with all of her force, crippling a leg. It fired again, close range, and Khepri was dazed once more. She felt a touch on her arm, but it vanished just as soon as it had been there. Then she felt sickly. As the smoke cleared, she realized what had happened. The rocket man was a distraction. Rashida had slipped in and touched her while her focus was gone. She had used her own mystic touch. Khepri collapsed as the sickness washed over her. She knew she was dying once again. You will never be rid of me, Khepri declared between coughs. No matter how hard you try, I will be there. You will never be rid of me. Not forever, Sekhmet Sion agreed. But for today, I will. She watched as Khepri's image faded, and slowly the misty form of the spirit lady replaced her. Although the image was fuzzy, Sion could clearly see the expression on the ghost's face was of a profound sadness. Their eyes met, and for a second, Sion thought the spirit understood. Then it slowly fell into a cloud of mist, which seeped through the floor and vanished. Mass lashed out with the iron fist. Crusader slammed into the wall. The mirrored man was launched skyward. Ironclaw was whipped around. Dynamo was slammed to a violent halt just as he came back in. Sion was picked up by her leg and tossed aside. Mass turned just in time to see Comrade Cosmos barreling towards him. The enormous Ashvelian was a terrifying sight, careening into him, but Uriah Mass had the power here. He lifted the iron fist, and just in time, Comrade Cosmos was forced to a stop. The Archbishop's shoulder erupted in pain. Cosmos was shooting him with his eye-beams, and Mass just managed to tear himself away to the side, out of the line of fire, but the pain was excruciating. Outrageous! Archbishop Uriah Mass declared to the room, even as his remaining followers began to fall to what remained of the supers. You think you are of an equal power! Incredibly, trapped in the field of absolute control, Comrade Cosmos somehow spoke. Your glove is no true power. It must have been an unbearable pain, and he was no doubt tearing himself apart, even with his enhanced physiology. The Iron Fist is but a mere fragment, Mass declared. Your audacity comes from how you defy the dragon, how you defy God. Cosmos actually chuckled. Fool, there is no God. Then I'm glad you're here to be educated, Mass said in gleeful fury. Watch as the great Earth Dragon below, he pointed downwards, remakes this wretched world into a glorious new heaven. You will! As he pointed towards the sky in ecstasy, he froze. A single round eye, right in the middle of a hammer and sickle, was staring right at him. Just as the laser beam was fired at him, Uriah Mass lifted his gauntlet. The laser hit the nearly indestructible artifact, and Mass slammed the Soviet into the wall. The moment of relief and triumph was the last he experienced, as two thinner bolts pierced his heart. Comrade Cosmos, bleeding from his mouth after the effect of speaking while in the field, nonetheless raised himself off of the ground where he had landed when he was released. Posed midway through his charge, it had been an awkward drop when the priest forgot about him, but it hadn't affected his aim. After all he needed to do was look at his enemy and focus. Sekhmet Sion had been the first to recover. Quickly, the other Stormbreakers and Commissars did as well. They all stood in a semicircle facing the orb of lava and rock that had surrounded Edward. As if they had rehearsed it, Sekhmet nodded to Cosmos, and they all sprang into action. No man halted the flow of lava on one end. Kid Cosmos, Ironclaw, Sekhmet, and Comrade Cosmos provided new rock shields to interrupt it further. Dynamo and the Broken Man rushed through the gaps and zipped around inside the bubble, dodging Edward's attacks, and Renaissance Man and the Eye waited for the moment where the sight lines cleared. The Eye blasted the tablet out of place, while Renaissance Man landed 2 tranquilizer darts on Edward. It had all lasted about 5 seconds, and then it all dropped. Edward, his rocks, and the stream of lava. It all collapsed. It was over. As the teams collected Edward and the tablet, Scion turned to Cosmos. Perhaps it is fortunate after all that we tested ourselves against each other so recently. It reminds us that even with all our power, the correct counterpoint renders all of it useless.
They had power, Cosmos said dismissively, but they lacked the skill to use it.
The sound of jets overhead cut through the lull. There were dozens that passed overhead. Reinforcements. Finally. Heroes, soldiers, all the backup the world could give. They could hear some of them land even. They could see a couple of new crystal spirits enter the chamber. The cavalry had arrived. The Marquis started laughing uproariously. He slowly rose to his feet as his laughter increased in volume. "Would you shut up already?" Diego asked. "I'm sorry," the Marquis said, wiping away a tear. "It's just so funny." "You have nowhere to go," No Man said. "It's over, Marquis." The Marquis ignored him. "It's just so funny that there are so many here to stop this from happening. And all it takes is a little push." No Man understood right away, and yet all too late. The Marquis was holding an arrow. Staring at the Stormbreakers, grinning broadly, he let it dangle from his index finger and thumb, and before they could get to him, he dropped it. The arrow fell downward, and downward, and downward, not even stopping at the floor, but punching straight down into it and beyond, continuing straight down until it would hit the dragon itself. From the jaws of victory has defeat been snatched? The Stormbreakers and even the Commissars have defeated the cult of the dragon and its incredible powers, and yet, such a simple ploy from the insane Marquis could undo it all. Find out what final desperate acts they will perform to save the world next time on the Mirage Barrage.